Howdy Bubs and welcome back. Today we're jumping back into GameMaker and we're working on getting our game to add in a couple of new features. First, our goal is to make sure that within the room, rather than starting with a ball, whenever I press a key, the ball will appear in front of our player and then fly off into a random direction. In addition to that, I want the ball to be a different color each time, and then finally have some collisions with the ball and our player object. So let's go ahead and jump into the code. So here we have our player. I've completed the rest of the operations, matching what I had y'all work on, and I'm going to go ahead and add in a new event. In this case, we're going to have another event, but this time it's going to be a key pressed event. The difference between key down, key pressed, and key up: key down happens and keeps checking every time you hold down the key. So whenever we're moving and I hold down the right arrow key, or in my case D, I continuously move to the right. If it was a key pressed event, it only happens once, the first time you hold it down. After you release, then you can hold it down again, but it'll only trigger once every time it is pressed, not continuously. Key up is the same, but rather than triggering on the press of it, it only triggers whenever it is released. So since I only want to create one ball at a time, I'm going to use a key pressed event. In this case, I'm going to use key pressed and go ahead and go with space. And so this will create a ball. So in our case, I want to make sure the ball appears in our room and it flies around however we see fit. There's two ways we can create that: either an instance create layer or an instance create depth function. In our case, just for simplicity's sake, I'm going to use an instance create depth. So instance underscore create depth, and then we go ahead and put in our parameters. Where do we want the ball to appear? Right now I'm just going to use X and Y. This is referencing the X and Y of the player, and if you set your origin correctly in the center, that means it will have the ball appear directly in the middle of the player. Our depth, I'm just going to set it at 0, and then what do we want to appear here? I'm going to specify obj underscore ball, which is what I called my ball that bounces around. If you called your object something different, put whatever your object name is so that way it matches. Now, whenever I press the space bar, we should now have something appear on the screen. Let's go ahead and test this. So now I have my player object. I can move left and right perfectly fine. I'm going to press the space bar, and now a ball has appeared. It bounces around. I can press space bar again, and another ball appears bouncing around. If I hold down space bar, we see only one ball is appearing, again because we use a key pressed event rather than a key down event. And so you can launch multiple, and this actually lets us demonstrate that our randomize functions actually are working, as the balls are all moving in a different direction based off of when they were launched. Our next activity here is now to get the colors to be randomized. I don't want the same color ball bouncing around each time. I would like to have a slight variety. So let's go ahead and close this out and test out that functionality. Now, over into our sprites section, I have created 3 additional sprites for the ball, as well as renamed the ball to include its color. The reason being is I want to have my sprite for our ball potentially be different, so that way it's a different color. Going into here, we can now use a special clause, the with clause. So with, and then we specify this thing that we have just created. What this is doing is it allows for us to modify some components of this object, the properties of this object, as soon as it is created. So here in our instance create depth, we are able to modify information about this ball before the first line of code actually runs and it bounces around the room. So in here, I want to change its sprite. So that is as simple as sprite underscore index and change it from being the default, which is for OBJ ball is just the white. I want it to instead be a couple of different options. I'm going to use the choose function, and here we specify all our options. It can be SPR underscore ball blue, SPR underscore ball purple. I'm going to move this to the next line, SPR underscore ball red, or SPR underscore ball white. Since we have 4 options, it is evenly split between these 4 options as to what color the ball might be. So now whenever I run the code, if I press spacebar, we have a purple ball. White, a different color, blue, red, and it is random each time. Now, with this out the way, the last thing that we want to implement is now just the ability for our ball to interact and collide with our player object, the box, and if it impacts it, to bounce around just the same as it is currently bouncing around the room. Let's go ahead and do that. Now to implement the collisions on the ball, let's go ahead and go to our ball object and we're going to add a new event. We're going to add a collision event with the player. So in here this is going to address bouncing off player, and now we simply need to add in a similar structure on how we had the intersection for the boundaries. So there are going to be a couple of changes. So we're going to use another if statement to check if a condition is met, but we're going to be using place underscore meeting, and this will check if some part of our object intersects with another part of our object based off of a couple of locations. So now we just need to reference our current position for X and Y, and then the object we're looking to make contact with. In this case, obj underscore player, or whatever you called your player object. So to represent this is essentially just checking if where we currently are and we collide with this other object, are we currently intersecting with it? I am simply going to check if I shift myself 1 over to the left, or same line, but shift myself 1 over to the right, if we're still colliding, then I want to change my horizontal speed to the times equal -1, essentially flipping the sign of it. Same thing that we had done whenever we did the intersect boundaries over in this bouncing wall portion. Times equals is just a shortcut to represent this exact same operation. We're actually going to copy and paste this and slightly shift it away. Rather than doing x minus 1, we're going to do y minus 1. Rather than x plus 1, we're going to do y plus 1. And I'm going to modify this to do vertical speed. Then last but not least, I'm going to follow the same thing that we did in our create event. Once we've got that, we can go into our obj player collision and modify this so that way our direction is plus equals a random number between -2 and +2, all integers. And so what this will do is it'll slightly shift the direction that we move after bouncing with the player by either 2 degrees clockwise up to 2 degrees counterclockwise, anything within those bounds. And there's a possibility that 0 is selected, in which case there is no shift. Let's go ahead and test this out and see what it looks like. So I press spacebar and we see all of the balls appearing, and as soon as I move off, they go flying off into the different directions. And we can see them colliding into the player. Now, it's not 100% perfect. There are some times at certain angles that the balls will actually go into the player, but we can see them bouncing off into different directions each time. One known thing is as we move, we can actually move into a ball and it can cause it to kind of freak out like this. For the time being, we'll leave it as is. There is a way to address this, but we'll just treat it as a feature, and as soon as you move out of it, it gets released. We can treat it as a ball capture mechanic, if you will. But that's all that we have for today. We now have the creation of the balls by pressing a key, in my case spacebar, and then we have the balls having a different color randomly chosen between, in my case, 4 options. Your case, you'll have as many options as you'd like. And finally, I have the collisions between the ball and our player object implemented. If you have any questions, just let me know in class. Otherwise, that's all I've got. All of y'all have a good one. I just wanted to say thank you to all of my Patreon supporters. Shout out to my bad bubs, my top 5, my day ones. Y'all have always been there for me. Next up, my baby bubs, the next 5. I always love y'all's support. And finally, for everyone else, any little bit helps. Thank you to all my basic bubs for supporting me along my journey. If you want to continue receiving notifications, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and don't forget to hit that bell button.